If you liked the video, feel free to subscribe. It would really help the channel, and we have battle reports and list videos every week. Thanks for watching. Thanks for stopping by. This video is going over 2 all infantry lists for the Grey Knights using the Warpbane Task Force. I've been testing some of the lists for the Warpbane Task Force using all infantry. I decided to focus on these 2 lists for the video. One is a very heavy points denying Purifier list. The other list focuses more around dealing mortal wounds. We will quickly go through the Warpbane Task Force rules and then on to the lists. We still have the same Grey Knights army rule where at the end of the opponent's phase we can select a certain amount of units depending on the battlefield size and the opponent's phase. You can pick those units up and bring them back onto the battlefield in our next turn. Our detachment rule, hallowed ground. Any Grey Knights unit will re-roll their hit roll of 1, and if we are wholly within our hallowed ground, we can re-roll the entire hit roll instead. And how do you get in hallowed ground? Our deployment zone is always hallowed ground. If you control at least half of the objectives in no man's land will also be within hallowed ground. If you control at least half of the objectives in your opponent's deployment zone will be hallowed ground as well. And the big thing with this detachment, within 6 inches of any Purifier squad is within the hallowed ground. So that means Purifiers are always going to be re-rolling their hit roll in this detachment. We will talk about the enhancements when we talk about the particular character that the enhancement is attached to. The 6 stratagems for Warpbane Task Force. The first one, Repelling Sphere. Subtract 1 from any charges made to a Grey Knight's infantry, and if that infantry is within hallowed ground, subtract 2 from the charges. This is targeting your Grey Knight's infantry. This means any enemy unit that does target this unit has -1 or -2 from their charge. Next up, and one of the more powerful stratagems, Sanctified Kill Zone for 1 CP. In your shooting or your fight phase, you can re-roll your wounds of 1. And if you're a Purifier squad, you get to re-roll the entire wound roll. So that means for 1 CP, Purifiers can re-roll their hit roll and their wound roll. Hallowed Beacon. In your reinforcement step, you can bring down a Grey Knight's infantry, excluding Terminators, wholly within your hallowed ground, but also 6 inches away from enemy units. So this is a 6-inch deep strike inside your hallowed ground, and you can charge after you deep strike. Flames of Sanctity for 1 CP at the end of the fight phase, 1 Purifier squad, so you can only use this on a Purifier squad. Any enemy unit within 6 inches of this Purifier squad, roll 1d6 for each enemy unit within 6 inches, and you add 1 if you do have Crow inside that Purifier squad. On 4+, that enemy unit suffers D3 mortal wounds. Next up is Fires of Covenant in the start of your movement phase, 1 Grey Knight's infantry unit. Until the end of the phase, each time an enemy unit ends a normal, advance, or fallback within 6 inches, you roll a d6. You add 2 if that Grey Knight's infantry unit is wholly within the hallowed ground. On a 4+, that enemy suffers D3 mortal wounds. Flames of Sanctity in this stratagem is a good way to do some chip mortal wounds to the enemy. Then finally, we have Aegis Eternal. This can only be used in the shooting phase. This gives one of your Grey Knight's infantry units a 4+ invulnerable save. And that is our detachment and stratagems for the Warpbane Task Force. Let's move on to the list and the unit breakdown. Our first Warpbane Task Force list is called Purifier Jail. It comes to 2,000 points. Our warlord is Kaldor Draigo. Characters in the list, we have Castellan Crowe, a Grandmaster with the Radiant Champion enhancement with a side cannon, a Brotherhood Chaplain with the Paragon of Sanctity enhancement. For a battle line, we have 3 units of 5 Terminators. All 3 of them have a banner, Narthecium, and side cannon. 2 units of 5 strike squads. Both of them have a side cannon with the close combat weapon. Then finally, for our other data sheets, we have 3 units of 10 Purifiers with 4 Incinerators and 4 close combat weapons in each of the 10-man units. And that comes to 2,000 points exactly. Let's move on to the unit breakdown. Both of these lists are going to have Castellan Crowe attached to a 10-man Purifier squad. I joined him with the 10 Purifiers to take advantage of one of the stratagems in the detachment, and this will be our anti-infantry hunting unit. This big 10-man unit will also be great utility for spreading mortal wounds around the board, plus the 10-man can spread a big hallowed ground 6-inch aura. The detachment rule, hallowed ground, makes this detachment made for Purifiers. They add so much to a list in this detachment. They can spread a 6-inch aura of reroll hits and thus reroll hits all the time for themselves. And this unit will be incredibly deadly into infantry units, rerolling all the purifying flames and other ranged weapon hits, and then you charge in to have reroll the hits in combat as well. Let's move on to the stratagems and how they benefit this unit. Sanctified Kill Zone for 1 CP, and this is such an amazing stratagem on the Crowe and Purifiers unit. We can use it both in the shooting and the fight phase. The Purifiers already have reroll hits from the detachment rule. Now we can reroll the wound roll as well for 1 CP. So that is 24 Purifying Flame attacks, including Crowe, 4 Incinerators, 7 Storm Bolters in the shooting phase, all rerolling hits and wounds. And Crowe does have precision on his melee weapon, which will love reroll hits and wounds in combat. Flames of Sanctity from 1 CP. Crowe makes this stratagem much more reliable with a 3+ instead of a 4+, even though he does already add a lot of utility to a Purifier unit in this detachment. If we do have 2 CP, we can charge a unit with Sanctified Kill Zone to have reroll hits and wounds and kill the unit, consolidate even further into the enemy army if we can, and as long as we're not hitting only one unit with the stratagem, it is worth it to drop some mortal wounds on a big bunch of the enemy units. And this is a big unit, so take advantage of the board space we can fill to use this stratagem. It hits all enemy units within 6 inches, so try to hit as many as you can. Hallowed Ground for 1 CP. We can use this on the Crowe unit to help get some line of sight on some important enemy units. What we can also do, since his Purifiers give off the 6-inch Hallowed Ground aura, we can use this to set up other friendly units within 6 inches of this Purifier unit. With the big 10-man, we can make a nice landing pad for a large amount of units if need be. Aegis Eternal for 1 CP. It's shooting phase only though. The Purifiers and the Strike Squad have a 2+ save. This adds a bunch of extra survivability, so now they'll be at a 2+ with a 4+ invulnerable. And this will be a stratagem that we use almost every time our unit is targeted in the shooting phase. We want to keep this unit around as long as we can. The final stratagem, Repelling Sphere for 1 CP. This is not a stratagem we'll be using every time we are charged. This unit is also always in the Hallowed Ground. Using this stratagem will always take -2 from the enemy charge roll, and this can really cripple those charges out of Deep Strike. 9-inch charges are now 11-inch charges. Castellan Crowe in the 10 Purifier squad is going to be an infantry blender. Crowe combined with the detachment rule and Sanctified Kill Zone, and Crowe will use his precision weapon to cut down enemy characters with reroll hits and wounds. Many ways to throw out some extra wounds with multiple stratagems. This unit has performed very well in all my practice games and testing so far. Next up is our Warlord Kaldor Draigo with the 5 Terminators. Draigo adds some melee threat to the list with some reliable deep strike charge. His 1 with the warp ability gives that unit a once per game +3 to the charges made out of deep strike. He gets the reroll hits from the detachment rule if we're in the Hallowed Ground, and reroll hits of 1 natively from the detachment rule, and we want to pair that with the lethal hits from the Brotherhood Terminator's Hammer Hand ability. A great unit to make an important charge to steal an objective or engage an important enemy unit. There's only 2 stratagems I really want to focus on for this unit. Fires of Covenant for 1 CP. The 3 Terminator units in the list are going to be used as objective holders and frontline pushing units. We can use this to throw out some extra mortal wounds. Those enemy units do have to be within 6 inches, but it does help do a little bit of extra chip damage. Repelling Sphere for 1 CP. These units will be taking a lot of the enemy pressure. We can use this to try to get some failed enemy charges. Then we have a Grandmaster leading yet another unit of Brotherhood Terminators. The Grandmaster has a movement of 5, toughness of 5, 2-up save, 7 wounds with a 6-up leadership and 1 OC. I have him equipped with a Psy Cannon, and he does attack 5 times with his Nemesis Force weapon, which is one of the higher attacks with the generic characters. He has 2 abilities, the Might of Purity. While this model is leading a unit, you can ignore all modifiers. You also have Master Strategist, and this is only a once per battle, not a once per battle round, and it reduces the cost of a stratagem to 0 CP. The Might of Purity ability will allow us to engage those units with the negative modifiers like -1 to hit or -1 damage. The Master Strategist, the once per battle ability, could be used on a Sanctified Kill Zone to get us reroll wounds, or Repelling Sphere just to try to get some failed enemy charges. The enhancement that we do have on the Grandmaster is Radiant Champion. The bearer's melee weapons have the precision ability, and while the bearer is wholly within the army's hallowed ground, each time a melee attack made by the bearer scores a wound, the target of that attack suffers 1 mortal wound in addition to any normal damage. And as we've seen, the Grandmaster has 5 attacks, one of the highest of the generic Grey Knights characters. The Captain does have sustained hits 1, and he could spike to get more than his base 4, but I also wanted a unit to handle those damage modifying units. With 5 attacks, if they all connect, we could get a total of 15 damage, 10 from the Nemesis Force weapons, and 5 extra mortal wounds on top of it. And the stratagem support is pretty much the same as Kaldor Draigo. You have Fires of Covenant for doing some extra mortal wounds, and Repelling Spear to just try to make some enemy failed charges. The last of our Terminator units is the Brotherhood Chaplain with the 5 Terminators. And this unit is going to be our Anvil unit. And these cannot use the hollow ground to drop within 6 inches of the enemy, but the detachment rule does give these Terminator units much more reliable melee threat. And the Brotherhood Chaplain gives the unit some anti-elite and anti-tank potential. We do have Paragon of Sanctity on our Chaplain, and what this does is a once per battle, we can pick a friendly unit within 18 inches and visible. Until the end of the phase, that unit is within the hollowed ground. In a phase of reroll hits and better stratagem support, we could turn a prolonged engagement into taking that unit out in just one phase. Throw it on the Grandmaster's unit to take advantage of the Grandmaster's enhancement, just to try to crank out some extra mortal wounds. And let's take a look at the Brotherhood Chaplain's datasheet. He has the regular Terminator character profile, movement of 5, toughness of 5, 2-up save, 5 wounds, 5 leadership, and an OC of 1. And that leadership of 5 is some of the highest the Grey Knights do have access to. He can only equip the Stormbolter as his range weapon. For the melee weapon, he has the Crozius, 5 attacks, hitting on 2s, strength 6, AP 1, damage 2. His abilities, he has Deep Strike, Words of Power, and Dread Bearing. Words of Power, while this model is leading a unit, each time a model in that unit makes a melee attack, add 1 to the wound roll. Dread Bearing, while an enemy unit is within 6 inches of this model, each time that unit makes a battle shock or a leadership test, subtract 1 from that test. So Dread Bearing won't make that much of a difference, but Words of Power will really crank out the damage of this unit. Plus 1 to the wound roll in melee is huge for the Grey Knights. We have strength 6 melee weapons army-wide, so this is a big boost to our damage output. Get in the hollow ground to reroll all the hits as well. The Brotherhood Terminator's Hammer Hand ability gives the lethal hits in melee, so let's reroll all the hits with plus 1 to the wound in melee. All of a sudden, these are a credible threat. The stratagem support is the same for other Terminators, but there is one difference. And the one other stratagem I do want to talk about is Sanctified Kill Zone. This is Terminator, so we'll only get to reroll wound roll of 1, but unlike the other Terminators in the list, I would consider this stratagem on this unit. With this Chaplain attached to the Terminators, into anything under toughness 6, we'll be wounding on a 2+, even against enemy units that are toughness 6 to toughness 11, with reroll wounds of 1 can really boost the damage of this unit. And into those under toughness 6 enemies, wounding on 2s with reroll wounds of 1 is very deadly. Let's touch on our 2 units of 10 Purifiers. These are the units that won't have a leader attached to them. The fact that these are in an all-game hollow ground makes them an auto-include. And we can also spread that hollow ground within 6 inches of our unit. Great for giving other units in the list that reroll hits ability. Purifiers have some really good stratagem support in this detachment. I'm still not sure if the 10-man units are the way to go, or should we stick to the smaller units with room for some other things in the list. Those stratagems that do support this unit, Hallowed Beacon, this stratagem we will use on other units to drop within that 6 inches aura for wholly within the hallowed ground. And we can use that 10-man Purifiers to give 6-inch charges out of Deep Strike to our Strike Squad or the Crow Purifier Squad, or even the other Purifier units in our list. Fires of Covenant, I want to use the 2 10-man Purifier units to move, block, and deny points, thus the Purifier Jail list name. Spread these 10-man units out as far as we can to move block, and then use this stratagem to drop some mortal wounds on anything that gets within 6 inches of the Purifiers. Aegis Eternal for 1 CP, having Purifiers at a 2+, 4+ invulnerable for 1 CP is fantastic. Be careful though, the enemy does not try to bait this stratagem out of us. Take the time to look what else will be shooting at our units this turn. The next one, the best one, Sanctified Kill Zone for 1 CP, Being able to reroll hits and wounds with these 10-man units is some scary damage into toughness 6 or less targets. It is a shame we only have Crowe to attach to Purifiers. Without Crowe in the unit, the shooting phase is not as scary into infantry. In the fight phase though, that is 18 attacks, hitting on 3s, strength 6, AP 2, damage 2, and then on top of that are close combat weapons with 12 attacks, hitting on 3s, strength 4, AP 0, damage 1. All of that rerolling hits from the hollow ground detachment rule and reroll wounds from this stratagem. The damage output of this unit is very reliable as long as we're not trying to attack those big toughness 12 targets. Flames of Sanctity for 1 CP. This is a Purifier squad unit only stratagem, but without Crowe in the unit, we do need a 4+ for the stratagem to go off. Great for when we charge into an area of the board where the opponent has a lot of their units bunched up. When we use Flames of Sanctity, we really need to be able to hit multiple units with it, or it really is a waste of CP. These units are the key to keeping our army with reliable damage output. Move block when we're able to, but only when it makes sense. You don't want to expose these to be shot just to block a few cheap chaff units. You really want to make sure you're move blocking a big chunk of the opponent's army, but also making sure you're not just going to get shot off the board for doing nothing pretty much. I might try to take a more strike squad heavy list and take advantage of the mortal wounds potential of this detachment. You can't go wrong with Purifiers in a Warpbane Task Force list. Finally, we have our 2 units of 5 strike squads. The strike squads in this list are for utility and using the sanctifying ritual ability to sticky objectives. You start one on the home objective, use the other to scout 6 inches toward the closest no man's land objective. There are a lot of good stratagems for these units in the detachment. With them only being the small, cheaper 5-man units, we may want to save those offensive stratagems for the other units in the list. The 2 I would consider is Aegis Eternal. 4-up invulnerable in the shooting phase is great for keeping these units on the board if they are in some line of sight doing an action or holding an objective. Once again, make sure there is not a more important unit that does need this stratagem more this phase. Repelling Sphere, 1 CP is a great price to pay to make the enemy unit charge if the strike squad is on an objective or doing an action. It's only really useful when we're wholly within the hollow ground for the -2 to the charge, because -1 a lot of times just doesn't make a lot of a difference unless they're going for those 9-inch charges, but -2 can really put a wrench in some of the charges. That's the unit breakdown. Let's quickly go over a general game plan for this list. I'm still working on getting this style of list to fully work. I want this to be a move block board control army. Use the 2 Purifier units that are not with Crowe to string out a move block, then use Fires of Covenant to drop some mortal wounds on any enemy unit who does move within 6 inches of those Purifiers. Having 30 models who can reroll hits and then wounds for 1 CP can do some serious work into the right targets. We do also have 3 quite deadly Terminator units who can clear objectives and engage with the opponent's more heavy hitters. The Chaplain's unit can reliably threaten anything under T12 with that +1 to the wound in melee. Crowe's unit will hunt down the most deadly enemy infantry units, using Sanctified Killzone to power this unit up to delete almost any infantry unit. This list does need some more work, but I like the idea of a board control Grey Knights list using all infantry. Our second Warpbane Task Force infantry list is called Mortals for Breakfast. This one comes to 2,000 points. Our warlord is Castellan Crowe. For our other characters, we do have 3 Brotherhood Librarians. One of them has the Vial of the Abyss and the other with the Paragon of Sanctity. We do have 1 Librarian with no enhancements. We also have 2 Brotherhood Champions, 1 with no enhancements and 1 with the Radiant Champion enhancement. Our battle line, 3 units of 5 Brotherhood Terminators. All 3 of them have the Banner, Narthasium, and a Psy Cannon. 2 units of 5 strike squads, 1 Psy Cannon and 1 close combat weapon in each unit. For our other data sheets, we have a big 10-man unit of Purifiers who will be joining Castellan Crowe. Rounding it out is 2 5-man Purifier squads. All of them have max incinerators, so 4 incinerators in our big one and 2 incinerators in each of our 5-man units. And this list comes to 2,000 points exactly. Let's move on to the unit breakdown. And we won't go over Castellan Crowe since he is exactly the same for this list. We'll start with our Brotherhood Champion and their strike squad units. I want to try some full-size strike squads, but for now, these will do the trick for what I want to do with them. I want to use them for utility and blocking charges. They can use sticky objectives with that Sanctifying Ritual ability in the command phase, and the Brotherhood Champions give these two units fights first. The Champions themselves have reroll hits and wounds into character units, which makes a big difference with the enhancement one of them has. One of them does have that Radiant Champion enhancement, where every time we score a wound, we also score a mortal wound on top of the damage that we do, and this enhancement makes the Brotherhood Champion a character killer. 5 attacks, hitting on 2s, strength 6, AP 2, damage 2, with reroll hits and wounds against character units. Now that profile has the precision ability and throws out some mortal wounds on any failed wound roll. For the stratagem support, Hallowed Beacon, we can use this stratagem to drop down and create a fights first screen to an important friendly unit. It might be a great option to set up some charge blocks for the opponent's next turn. It is only the small 5-man strike squads with the detachment so CP hungry. I would use this as a defensive move instead of an offensive move. Unless it's a net gain in points. Aegis Eternal and Repelling Sphere is the same as our Purifier jail list. You want to use this to keep this alive when they're doing some actions or on some objectives, but other than that, you want to save this for our bigger units. Same for Repelling Sphere. Use this to make some charges fail to keep some objectives. Otherwise, save it for our other units. Next up is our 3 Brotherhood Librarians with their 3 Terminator units. These Brotherhood Librarians will be the main mortal wounds output in the list. We can use other stratagems from the detachment to toss out some extra mortal wounds as well. The detachment rule Hallowed Ground for reroll the hits of 1 or reroll all the hits if we're wholly within the Hallowed Ground really pairs well with the Terminator's lethal hits hammerhand ability. And 2 of our Librarians do have enhancements. The first one, Paragon of Sanctity, and this allows us once per battle to a unit within 18 inches and visible, and until the end of the phase, that unit is wholly within the Hallowed Ground. The other Librarian has the Vial of the Abyss, and this enhancement gives the Librarian's unit the stealth ability. -1 to hit will help the unit's survivability in the shooting phase. If an objective that is a bit more open to line of sight needs to be held, this is a unit that is our best option for holding that objective. Fires of Covenant, these 3 Terminator units are going to be the objective holding and the frontline pushing units, so they'll be the ones to try to use this stratagem to push out some extra mortal wounds. Repelling Sphere, for the same reason, just because these units will be in the front lines, we can use this to try to get some failed enemy charges. Sanctified Kill Zone for 1 CP, for the most part, without a way to get +1 to the wound roll with this unit, reroll wounds of 1 will not be a large damage boost. Save the stratagem for Crowe and the Purifiers, or when we really need to take out an enemy unit with one of these Brotherhood Terminator units. Last up is our 2 5-man Purifier squads. These will be our scoring and utility units. I want to use these Purifiers to spread that reroll the hit roll throughout my army. The Brotherhood Terminators and the Strike Squads will really benefit from reroll the hit roll. We want to use the fact that these Purifiers spread a 6-inch aura of Hallowed Ground. We won't go through all the stratagems since we did that with Crowe and the Purifiers, so let's take a look at more of the utility stratagems for this unit since that is what we are going to be using this unit for. Hallowed Beacon for 1 CP. This is a stratagem we will use on other units to drop within that 6-inch aura, but wholly within the Hallowed Ground. And we can use these 5-man Purifiers to give a 6-inch charge out of Jeet Strike to our Strike Squad or our Crowe Purifier unit. Because once again, we cannot use Hallowed on a Terminator unit. Fires of Covenant for 1 CP. We want to use these to get points and giving rerolls to the army. If we need to, we can use these units to move block and throw out some mortal wounds with this stratagem. But for these smaller 5-man units, this might be a tactic for the late game. We don't want to move block turn 1 with these and get them killed just to throw out a few mortal wounds. Aegis Eternal for 1 CP, and like I keep saying for the Purifiers and the Strike Squad, bringing these up to a 4+ invulnerable really helps the survivability of these units. These units really are the key to keeping our Grey Knights rerolling the hits and having more overall reliable damage, especially into those tougher targets. The Terminators really rely on that lethal hits ability, so re-rolling our hits and fishing for those lethals into those tough targets can really make a difference when we're attacking those tough targets that usually give the Grey Knights some fits. Now for the game plan of our Mortal Wounds for Breakfast list. The theme of this list, if you can guess, is mortal wounds. We want to use the Librarians to throw as much big mortal wounds into those tougher targets as we can, while we use Flames of Sanctity and Fires of Covenant to throw out some extra mortal wounds throughout the enemy army. Turn 1 and turn 2, use the strike squads and our smaller 5-man Purifier squads to hunt down enemy scoring units when able. The Teleport Assault Army rule will help us get some early points and possibly some line of sight into those important enemy scoring units. Turn 3, we want to start committing our Terminators to objectives, clear them out so we can sticky them with our 2 strike squad units. We want to spend those first few turns chipping the army down and then turn very aggressive. Get the objectives in no man's land and then spread hallowed ground into no man's land to help our now much more aggressive army. Spend those first few turns scoring as many points as possible while staging to gain those no man's land objectives in the mid game. If we can get the hallowed ground in no man's land, our Terminators become even more valuable because then we no longer have to rely on being around Purifiers to get their reroll hits. We can just be in the hallowed ground, reroll hits, and crank out some good damage. And that's our 2 lists with the 2 game plans. Let's move on to the final thoughts. On to some final thoughts. I think there is some play with these all infantry lists, especially when we're using them to move block and throw out some mortal wounds. The all infantry lists are harder to play than the all Dread Knight spam list. I may even try to get some more Strike Marines and drop the Terminators altogether in some of these lists. I'm still not sure yet. I will also play around with some combined armed lists with the Dread Knights and the Infantry. I will also play around with some combined armed lists for the Dread Knights and Infantry and put some list videos out for those builds as well. Subscribe for weekly battle reports, list videos, and other Warhammer 40K content. Thanks for watching. Thanks for stopping by.